Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Uh, this is the second part of the lecture on Ijarah. We have covered the rules of Ijarah and we discussed how Ijarah can be used as a mode of finance by the Islamic banks. Still, the question remains in the mind of the audience, KG, uh, what is the difference between Ijarah and conventional leasing? So, this lecture is an attempt to answer that question. Okay, so we'll discuss the main differences between these two concepts, Ijara and conventional leasing. First of all, in case of conventional leasing, this conventional leasing is based on financial lease. Uh, uh, Financial lease, financing lease contain conditions of hire purchase which is not permissible by Sharia, and car financing or loan agreement contain conditions of interest. Interest is considered riba by Sharia. By Sharia. So, in conventional leasing, the concept is based on the financial lease where you are getting a loan and you are repaying the loan with interest on it. Whereas in case of Ijara, the contract is not uh, about a loan. It is basically the contract is made for the renting of the asset. So the Islamic bank is giving you the vehicle on rent. They are charging rent against that amount, against the usage of that vehicle. And since the customer is interested in getting the ownership of the asset as well, so there is another contract. This second contract is not part of the Ijara contract. It is promise to sell, and in that promise to sell, bank give this undertaking that if the client make full payment, the of the asset, it will be transferred. The ownership of the asset will be transferred to the client. Okay, now second point, the difference is in conventional leasing products, the customer is responsible for all kind of losses or damages to the leased asset, irrespective of the circumstances. Now, if the insurance company does not compensate the entire outstanding amount in case of total loss, the customer is liable to pay the balance. Whereas in case of Ijara, all risks pertaining to ownership are borne by lessor. We discussed this in the rules of Ijara that the owner of the asset is responsible for all the risk. It undertakes carry the risk for the ownership of the asset throughout the period of the lease. Why? Because the ownership of the asset is not transferred. He is giving the right of usage to the customer. So that is the reason that customer only bears usage related risk. Lessor bears the risk of insurance claim settlement. Okay. Now the third difference is that if the leased asset is stolen or completely destroyed, the conventional leasing company or bank would continue charging the lease rent till the settlement of the insurance claim. Whereas in case of Ijara, in case of the total destruction of the asset, the payment of the rental stop because the rent is for the usage of the asset. So once the asset becomes unusable or it will lose its utility, in that case, bank is not responsible for the client is not responsible for payment of the outstanding rentals. The fourth difference is this is related to the penalty on late payment. So in the case of the financial lease, an extra amount is charged if rent is not paid on time. This extra amount is considered riba as far as the Islamic Sharia is concerned, and it is not allowed. Whereas in case of conventional leasing, they are charging this extra amount and they are considering or they are adding it in their income. So this extra amount charged for late payment is considered the additional income for the conventional banks. Whereas in case of Ijara, Islamic banks, they do charge the extra amount for as a penalty for late payment, but that extra amount charged is used in charity. They do not consider this extra amount as their income. The fifth difference is insurance is independent of the lease contract. The insurance expense of the asset is directly borne by the lessee in case of financial lease. Whereas in case of takaful or in case of ijara, takaful is Islamic insurance. It is the expense should be borne by the lessor and not the lessee. So the lessor may increase the lease rent to recover any cost incurred by him in connection with the asset. However, as a matter of principle, the cost should be paid by the lessor. Uh, I'll take a break of 2 minutes. I'll be back with you. Okay, Ji, I'm back. We were discussing the differences between Ijara and conventional leasing, and so far we have covered the first five differences. Move on to the sixth, the difference. Uh, in case of conventional leasing, lessee is or the client is responsible for registration of leased vehicle. Whereas in case of Ijara, the leased vehicle is registered in the name of the bank, and registration charges are paid by the bank or the lessor. Now, the lessor may increase the lease rent to recover any cost incurred by him in connection with the asset. Okay, so as a matter of principle, at the beginning, when this cost is incurred, it should be paid by the uh, Islamic bank, and that can be recovered by the Islamic bank later on in the form of installments. But since it is an user related, is ownership related expense, so it should be borne by the Islamic bank. Okay, another difference is that in case of conventional leasing, it is based on the financial lease agreement in which this clause is part of that contract that at the end of the lease period, the asset will be transferred to the client. So there is no other requirement for that. The only thing is that the client has to make the full payment. Whereas in case of Ijara, since Ijara is a contract for rent, it does not include any clause that states that the asset will be transferred to the client at the end of the lease agreement. So separate sale agreement is required to execute sale transaction at the end of lease term. Um, Next difference is lease agreement can be signed by the lessee. There is a typo here. The lease agreement can be signed by the lessor and lessee anytime, even if the leased asset is not owned by the customer. So it means that the contract can be signed, lease agreement can be made, and then later on the conventional bank can proceed to get the ownership of the asset. Whereas, as far as the rule of Ijara is concerned, the contract of Ijara cannot be made until and unless the lessor has the asset has come into existence, the asset is in the ownership of the lessor, and lessor has taken the possession of the asset. So all these three requirements need to be met before signing the contract of Ijara. The customer will suffer loss of interest paid during the booking period because installment commence immediately after payment of cost of asset to the manufacturer or dealer. So, in case of conventional leasing, the installments can start even before the delivery of the car of the asset, whereas in case of Ijara, the rule of Ijara is that the rentals can only start after the delivery of the assets. You are not The customer is not liable to make the payment of rentals before the delivery of asset. Now, it will make difference only when if in case the customer do not make the full payment, and then in that case, if the asset is to be if the car is taken back by the bank, or the bank is going to sell the car to third party, so in that case the customer will suffer this loss in case of conventional leasing, because he has already paid those installments for the period for which he was not using the asset. Whereas in case of Ijara, the customer will not be suffering this loss because he has not made any payment before the delivery of the asset. So these were the 10 main differences that we discussed. You can go through over these differences and see if you face any problem or if any ambiguity is there. You can definitely ask me using the discussion forum of the LMS. So with this, we come to the end of our lecture on Ijara. So basically, we have covered main, the rules which are related to the Ijara and different points which are related to the Ijara, and then the main differences between Ijara and conventional leasing. So that's all for this lecture. If you have any questions, we are most welcome to ask those questions. Thank you very much.